Dr. Perry, welcome back to the Healthpath podcast. We just said off air that I think it's safe to say you are now our regular guest on the podcast. So thank you for coming back.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. I always have such a wonderful time on your show. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very grateful.
No, we've had such great feedback from our last episode, which was on the vagus nerve. And for those that haven't seen them, we've done 2 episodes on the lymphatic system. And today we're talking about the glymphatic system. So I don't think we need to do any intros. I think everyone's going to be very familiar with your background now, Dr. Perry. So I say we just dive in.
That sounds good to me, man. You know, I'm always down for talking about lymphatics and glymphatics. I think 200 episodes would never be enough, in my opinion, you know.
So where do you want to start? I mean, I guess just essentially breaking it down and helping people understand what the glymphatic system is. It might still be a term that some people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, very much so. I think I want to start off by saying one of the phrases that I teach all the time, and I'm pretty sure I've said it on the other podcast, and it's very applicable here. It's this: no system in the body ever works alone, never gets injured alone, never heals alone. There's no such thing as an isolated injury in the body. There's no such thing as isolated healing. It's all or nothing. The body is one piece. Unfortunately, we don't treat it that way. And I wanted to say that because when you talk about glymphatics, that just lymph is lymphatics kind of at the end, right? And glymph is for glial. And those are a type of cells that are in the brain. You've got several different types, which we'll talk about. So it's the same, but different. What I mean by that is that even though we're talking about glymphatics in the brain, it's not separated from the lymphatics in the rest of the body.
Right.
So in my work, I found that you need to work the lymphatic system first and always. And then you'll notice that the glymphatics actually start to get better just from doing that. But then when you go more and work glymphatics, I found that your results are even better because you did the heavy lifting of the lymphatics first. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a really long way for me to say that these systems always work together, and that when you've done the lymphatic work that we've talked about in the past, you've unknowingly and positively affected your glymphatic system. Basically, what that is that that's the medical term given to the brain waste management system that you have. Remember, we talked about the lymphatics of the body and the lymph nodes, and they're basically mini toilets that you kind of flush out all the stuff that you don't want in your body, you know, bacteria, viruses, toxins, parasites, cancer cells. But also in this case for the brain, it's even more important. That's the metabolic cellular waste that's created from your cells dying every day on purpose, called autophagy. It's programmed death. And then other ones from trauma or injury, but also just from your cells normally working every day. They make a lot of waste. And you need to flush the toilets in your brain too. So the glymphatics are the brain toilets. And here's the cool thing. I'll give you one guess where they go: to the same place the lymphatics go. So they all go to the same drain point, which we'll go over when we get into it, is the collarbone. It goes to the veins of the collarbone. So everything goes to that sweet spot that we've talked about in the past. Right? What's interesting is that they used to think that the brain was immune privileged and really didn't have any interaction with what's called the peripheral, that's outside the head, immune system. But we realized through just progress in technology and what we can be able to see and asking different questions in science that we were wrong, that there is something there. And so those plumbing systems, if they get backed up, you get inflammation in the brain, just like you get inflammation in any body part. So, for instance, if your lymphatic system doesn't work well, you may get swelling, inflammation, pain, edema, chronic pain in like a leg. Same thing happens to your brain. It's just called something different than it's called neuroinflammation, nerve inflammation. You may know that as things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ADHD, things like that. Anything, brain fog, that's a big one, brain fog, which I'll tell you right now, brain fog is the number one symptom that you have in my world of a lymphatic system clog and a glymphatic system clog. Because if you clog one, you clog the other. They're both going that way. So in essence, we'll get more into it in detail. The glymphatic system is the waste management plumbing system of your brain. And if it is not functioning at optimum, you're going to see some symptoms somewhere that can actually be quite debilitating. But it happens slowly over time. And we'll talk about some more of the symptoms that you might experience from that. But that's the gist of what it is.
Okay. And then you kind of maybe already said this, but just to clarify, because there's such an intimate connection between the lymphatics and the glymphatics, if you've got symptoms of lymphatic congestion, you've listed some of them there, we are kind of saying that you've got a glymphatic issue as well, just by default.
I'm going to tell you that. Yeah. Okay. Now, whether they've been able to, well, you know what, they actually have been able to show that through research that, see, these immune systems in your brain and in the peripheral part of the body, they talk to each other. So they found through research, there's a brilliant neuroscientist researcher named Jonathan Kipnis, Kipnis. He actually was one of the people that discovered what they call the meningeal lymphatics. That's the lymphatics, and the meninges are the covering of the brain. Okay. And you've got several different layers of them. One is called the dura mater, and then there's a system that, holy cow, it's there. And then wait, I'll tell you later, they discovered a brand new layer of the brain they never knew about. And so he talks about that if you have inflammation in the peripheral lymphatics immune system, that will trigger the glymphatic system to start to go a little haywire, because stuff can cross the blood-brain barrier and then you get inflammation in the brain. So a lot of people end up having neuroinflammation and brain issues because they've got such a clogging in the rest of the body. But people don't look at the rest of the body. They just go after the brain because that's where they're feeling the symptoms, right? And it goes the other way around. Like if it goes from the body up to the brain, well, it can go from the brain to the body. So many people have pain in body parts and they attack the body parts. Meanwhile, you should go after the glymphatics in the brain because you'll help it that way too. So the rule is you work both because they're going to influence each other. And now, to me, that makes a whole heap of common sense because, I mean, do you really think that just because your brain sits on top of your shoulders that it doesn't communicate with the rest of your body? I mean, it's all connected through the same pipes, flow pipes, fluid pipes. And the fluids for you in your body, we've talked about before, a big one are your lymphatics, okay? And if you remember what we said before, you have about 700 lymph nodes in your body. Some say 4 to 7, somewhere in there. I just want you to know this more than 2, okay? 1/3 of that number is from the neck up. Remember that? Why do you think that is? Well, because it's got to take the drainage from the brain. Really important stuff, all right? So if you get clogged in the lymph nodes in the neck, guess what? You clog the lymph nodes in the brain because those pipes sit there, and pipes transmit fluid all over the place. And then you also have your blood flow pipes that sit there too. Blood supply going to your brain And then the veins coming from your brain, which also transfer waste. Okay. And I'll give you one guess what all that brain waste that you have, when we talk about how it works in a moment, because it's quite fascinating. Where do you think that dumps? It dumps into the veins in your neck, and it dumps into the lymph in your neck. So here's the moral of my story. If you're clogged at the collarbone and you're clogged in your neck, well, it only makes sense you're going to be clogged in your brain. So maybe you should clear the collarbone and the neck first. Then that automatically helps the brain drain better. It's sitting in less of its own waste, clogged toilet brain that you have. Okay. So that's actually quite fascinating when you realize that. And then when I taught people the big six, you remember the big six, where I taught people the 6 primary places to release the lymph node clusters in the body to help your lymphatic system and your blood flow? Well, the first 2 are the collarbone and the upper part of the neck behind the angle of the jaw, right below where everything drains. There's a reason I give those to you first, because I need to help the brain start to drain at the same time. So it's all just based on pressure. If everything is supposed to drain to the collarbone and it can't, where's it going to go? Well, it's going to go straight back up into your brain is where it's going to go. And then you're going to have waste, particularly proteins, metabolic proteins, amyloid proteins, tau proteins. Those are the ones that cause all the inflammation and really link to Alzheimer's. And you're going to feel it, right? Because they can't get out. Now I'm going to jump to something really quick, which is quite fascinating. I was speaking to Dr. Kipnis about this, and they had some drugs for Alzheimer's that they were really excited about on, making a difference in the Alzheimer's symptoms. And they put them through the clinical trials, and they were extremely disappointed in the outcome, because the medication started to break up the proteins, right? It started to dislodge the proteins that are like glue, muck, it's called. But people weren't getting better. And then they figured out, well, why in the world would that be? Well, let's think about it logically now. What happens if the proteins you dislodge, but they can't get out? Right? That's like having a clogged sink, and all you do is stick your hand in the sink and you swirl it around. You're going to make everything worse because it got stirred up, but the drain is still clogged. So now they're looking at opening up the drainage pathways, which I just told you how to do. A big part of it. Because if you're clogged in what they call the deep cervical lymph nodes, deep means deep. They're really far in there next to the spine. Cervical means neck. Lymph nodes are the toilets. That's where most of the brain, what's called cerebral waste, is supposed to go. If they're blocked, they're going to stay up in the head. Does that make sense? That's really big to understand, where when the light bulbs go off, then you're like, oh my God, I mean, that's so simple. Could it really be that simple? And in my mind, it is.
That's fascinating. So you've mentioned,
I love it. It's so freaking cool, especially because I've had neuroinflammation and brain inflammation. I mean, I've had that so much so that I could barely function. And I was really in a bad spot. So I got onto these things out of absolute necessity to rescue myself, because nobody else was doing it. And this was 8 years ago, before they really even saw how much the lymphatics and glymphatics are involved. But I'll be, whatever question you want to take, I'll be happy to kind of go over the general way that it works and the plumbing, without going too deep in the rabbit hole.
I think There's one thing that at some point would be great to go over again, which is perhaps the big six.
Oh yeah.
I know you talked us through that in the last episode, and there were just a few people that would love to learn a little bit more about, I guess, the technique, if I call it that.
Yeah.
But also to reiterate, I know that Dr. Karazian says this, that, if you are struggling with brain fog, it is basically saying that you have brain inflammation. And
Yeah, that's
therefore,
correct.
everything you're sharing in these episodes is relevant ultimately.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's review the big six. Okay, that is the foundational thing that I have every person do on a daily basis, just to reset their drain plumbing. It's making sure that your pipes are cleared every single day. Okay. So I call it the big six because it's a really big deal to do it. And that's six primary places. And people ask, why did you pick those places? Because these lymph node mini toilets gather in big clusters around areas of the body that move the most. And those are the joints of the body. And if you remember, movement moves the toilet, right? So the first place that you always want to work, and this is good because this also opens up the brain drain and helps the glymphatics, is the collarbone. Below the collarbone and above the collarbone, I'm going to go over the places first, and we'll go over the technique. You always do both sides, okay? And then you do the top of the neck. It's spot number 2 on the side of the neck, behind the angle of the jaw, next to what they call cervical 1, cervical 2. That's atlas and axis, below the lobe of the ear. That's the largest lymph node in the neck. If that's blocked, you're never going to drain your brain, period. Then spot number 3 is at the shoulder joint, because you got to move your arms a lot, right? At the what they call the pectoral / axillary. That's right at the shoulder joint, both sides. Number 4 is the abdomen, from the navel up, the whole thing. Okay, but particularly at the navel. Number 5 is the creases of the groin on either side near your hip joint. And number 6 is behind the knee joint, called popliteal. And you always clear them in that order for one reason, because everything wants to drain to the collarbone, because that's where there's low pressure. And you always clear lymph from low to high pressure. Okay. Now, when you work all those places, the most important thing to know is that you should clear them. Okay? How you clear them is up to you. Those are called techniques. The concept are the big six. If you know the concept, you can make a bajillion techniques. Right? I just want you to get in there and start rubbing it. And you go light, you go fast, you go slow, you go deep, you go hard. Just don't cause pain. Because if you cause pain, your nervous system's not going to want to do it, because it sucks, it hurts. And when you cause pain, you tighten up. And then I don't want you tight, because I got to open spaces. You're defeating the purpose. And yeah, I just like for people to rub in circles, clockwise and counterclockwise. And I really love figure 8s, or the infinity symbol, because people don't normally rub their body that way. But when you rub the lymph, you also open up the blood flow too. Okay. So that's really important, because this glymphatic system functions based on blood flow. So it's not just about lymph. That's what I need for people to really understand here. You need to optimize the blood flow to your brain, and it comes from the neck. You need to optimize blood flow from the brain, and that goes to the neck. If you're choked off one way, guess what? You're choked off the other way. It's all, remember I said it's all or nothing? And the brain requires 20% of the available oxygen in your body, because it's highly, listen to this, metabolically active. So it uses 25% of the energy in your entire body That's why a lot of people get really tired, fatigued, or brain fog when they have inflammation, because they don't have a lot of fuel going around. And so if it's highly metabolic, that means it has a lot of wiring and firing, a lot of stuff connecting in there, a lot of neurons going. They call that neuroplasticity. Yeah. You want to change the brain by wiring different ways. Okay? Well, when you have something that's really metabolically active, then you make a ton of waste at the same time. And then that waste needs to get out. And then what you'll find is when the waste can't get out, your brain doesn't wire and fire as much, because it's not going to let you put something in that you can't get out. So eventually you get to where you can't even put 2 and 2 together. Right. So in my mind, I think about that as an actual response from the body to say, hey, I can't give you your brain right now, because if I do, we're going to get worse. So it shuts itself down to what? Protect itself. Right. So if you clear your brain drain, then all of a sudden you go, wow, I'm feeling like a little more clarity today. I'm feeling a little less tired, a little less fatigue. And I was doing the same thing I was doing yesterday. But today, I don't feel that bad. Well, what did I do differently? Oh, I flushed my toilets. That's what I did. Now, I'm not saying that if you clear these things, that everything is going to miraculously heal and fix and get better. But I will tell you this, if you don't clear them, you're really going to struggle to get to that point. Right? Does that make sense?
Total sense. And thank you for going over that again. I think I got the sense that some people, when they were listening to our last episodes, were worried that there's a really right and wrong way to do the massage technique. But you kind of hopefully reassured everyone that, just get in there.
There's not. I don't like the word right and wrong. I just like the word different, because right for you may be wrong for me.
Yeah.
So it's contextual. Right? Like for one person who's really sensitive and really puffy and really swollen, well, I'm going to go easier on you because you can't take a lot.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, I'm going to go harder, but I'm not going to cause pain. I need for people to start to trust themselves and don't overthink things. And I say this phrase all the time: feel first, think second. Get out of your own head. Just feel the tissues. And if it feels good, do it. If it hurts, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. If it hurts, it's your body telling you, please do it differently. That's what it's telling you. All right. If you do it in that order, that's the most important part. Right? I have people that get in there and they use their hands. Some people like to use vibration balls. Like that's one of my favorite ones. It's very nice and relaxing. Some people use gua sha tools. Some people do cupping. Other people do laser. Some people go really, really super duper uber light, right? Others do fascial manipulation. Whatever you want, because here's the dirty little secret. Every single one of them moves lymph, right? And I like for you to do things differently, because to your brain, it lights it up. It's called novelty, because it gets used to stuff quick. And then it's like, been there, done that. I'm bored. Can you work something a little bit differently? But that's why I have people open up the big 6 first, because if I just started to try to work the brain glymph, I would be pushing that down towards blocks in the rest of the body. And it's just going to push it back up to your head. That's just how fluids work. Pressure doesn't just disappear into the universe. It's got to go somewhere. Slow flow in one place means more flow in another. Right? That's why opening up the collarbone is most important. But nobody really ever looks at the collarbone region for one simple reason: it doesn't hurt. They don't complain of physical pain there. It usually will be puffy and swollen. That's one of the first things that we look for. If you have puffiness and swelling above your collarbone, your brain's a hot mess. But Then my question is, how do you know it's not pain? Well, then what you do is you stick your finger in there and then you see if they don't like you. And pain means this. Pain means inflammation. And if you have inflammation, what does that automatically mean? That means you have an immune system that's doing something to protect you, because inflammation is an immune system response. It's not a musculoskeletal one. And what's the largest component of your immune system? You should say lymph right now. And now glymphatics. Here's the cool part, man. In the brain, you have what's called cerebrospinal fluid. Many people may have heard of that. It's fluid, first of all. Cerebro means head, spinal means spine. So that fluid coats around your brain so you don't knock your head against your skull every time you move it. And it goes along the spine itself and the roots, and it goes along the cranial, some of the cranial nerves that come off your brain stem in the back. And that's the fluid, and it circulates all the way around. But that cerebrospinal fluid comes from blood. So the blood in the cerebrospinal just didn't get made in unicorn land, right? It comes from the vascular system, and it leaks into the brain and circulates around. And what they're finding is that you have fluid inside your brain, right? Inside, called interstitial fluid. Interstitial means fluid between the cells, and you have that everywhere in the body, including the brain. So when you sleep at night, if you sleep at night, the brain actually shrinks 30 to 40%. It gets smaller. And what happens is it opens up space for the cerebrospinal fluid to flush in based on your breathing pumps the cerebrospinal fluid. And that fluid intermixes and goes into the interstitial fluid between the cells of the brain. So now there's more space for it to actually power wash all parts of the brain to dislodge the muck, right? And it gets into the brain through the arteries. It's called periarterial. Peri just means around. So there's arteries going into the brain. And remember, your brain needs a lot of blood flow. So around that pipe is another pipe with insulation. Think about insulation wrapping around it. And that's how the cerebrospinal fluid gets there. And then it leaks out of that space into the brain through these openings that some of your glial cells do for it, called astrocytes. Astrocytes are like these cells that have little mini suckers on the end of them. And astrocytes are the most numerous things in your brain. And then they'll actually allow that fluid to leak through. It's called aquaporin 4 channels. Not that you need to know that. And then so it lets it come on in, and then power washes. And then, okay, I got to get that stuff out. So then it's going to send it to the perivenous veins. So peri means around, and then the venous system is going to take that into what's called the meningeal lymphatics. Remember, the meninges are the covering of the brain, and lymphatics that are there. And it's going to drain that down to, where do you think? The collarbone. But it's also going to drain it to the lymph nodes in your where? Your neck here. Now, one of the biggest places that happens is actually through the front of your skull and what's called your cribriform plate. That's where your smell comes into your brain, right there, right between your friggin' eyes in front. And there's a plate there where olfaction, smell, projects up in through there, and then it drains the majority of that stuff around that olfactory nerve, and it sends it down into your neck here, right? That's also, one of the reasons why, when you inhale something toxic, that it goes into your head. I mean, it can make it goes straight into the brain, big time, right? And that flushes down to the collarbone. And then when you wake up, then the hormones change. the brain expands again, and then you go about your day and you make waste. Some waste drains during the day, but not a lot, because the brain, it takes a lot of energy to detoxify yourself. It's exhausting. So you don't really want to do that during the day, but during the day, you're still pooping in your brain toilet all day long. You follow? So if you didn't clean that the night before because you struggle with sleep, then you can't clean your toilet. So then I'm going to ask a question. Why do you struggle with sleep? Maybe you struggle with sleep because your brain toilet's been clogged for 10 years and you didn't even know it. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the lack of sleep cause the stuff happening in the brain with the waste, or did the waste now cause the problem with the lack of the sleep? I'm going to tell you yes is the answer. It's probably both. So that's why if I have people do the big six, they can concentrate on working the deep nodes in the neck. It means you spend more time in the neck, but there are also a lot of advanced techniques that I teach people in my advanced head, neck, and brain course called Glymphatic Mojo. That's different than lymphatic mojo. That's the one where we go in there and I teach people to go a lot deeper. You do things inside the mouth, you do things to the skull here, and you can influence how fluids drain from the head and to the head based on trying to create more space for things to drain. So they're finding that if you've had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury or a whiplash or some type of hit to your head, you're going to have a higher incidence of the cerebral brain waste. And the lymphatics, I think, are going to be huge players in helping these individuals recover from the symptoms that they get from concussions and traumatic brain injuries. Now, one more thing I want to say before I move on is that the covering of the brain, they're called meninges, and you got 3 different layers to them. They recently discovered a 4th one that's always been there, but it was so thin that we didn't have the technology to see it, right? And now they got to change all the books because now there's 4. And I'm going to give you the name of it. And I'm reading that from an article here. Newly discovered anatomy shields and monitors brain. It's called the subarachnoidal. So that's just a layer of the meninges. The subarachnoid space is where most of the stuff I just told you happens, right there. Subarachnoid lymphatic-like membrane. It's called SLYM. Biggest thing I want you to take away from that is the word lymphatic. And what they're finding is that system here, I'm going to read you something, if I may.
Yeah.
The role played by the SLYM in the glymphatic system, which requires a controlled flow and exchange of cerebrospinal fluid. That's what we just told you. Allowing the influx of fresh cerebrospinal fluid, right? So that when the brain shrinks, it's the fresh, it's like party time in your brain. The CSF increases while flushing the toxic proteins, because proteins you don't want floating around. They are really toxic and they're highly inflammatory. They're going to mess you up quick, fast, and in a hurry. Associated with Alzheimer's and other neurological diseases from the central nervous system, right? So basically what they're saying is in order to get clean in, you got to get dirty out. And I'll give you one guess where that brain layer drains to. The deep nodes in your neck. Okay. How about that for a mind blower, huh?
Brilliant. Okay. So I feel like just taking a step back and trying to summarize some of this, Dr. Perry, but I think the takeaways, if I'm correct, are that sleep is kind of important. But it's a
Yeah, big
there's
time.
a
Yeah.
there's a chicken and egg, as you say, in regards to what's driving what, especially if there's been a period of time with dysfunction in sleep or glymphatics. Um, and I guess, the foundations, what I sometimes refer to as like the prerequisites to health that
Yeah.
you shared last time, breathing and movements as kind of ways to move the lymph, are kind of
Right.
still obviously foundational here as well.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, I jokingly say, but I'm not joking, that if you're not sleeping, nothing works.
Yeah.
And same thing with hydration. If you're not drinking enough water, let me put a caveat there. Absorbing enough water. Just because you drink it doesn't mean you're absorbing it. And the dirty little secret is if you have a lot of muck in your system because your glymph are blocked, you're not absorbing it. So sleep is critical because that's when your brain shuts down. You actually can begin to wire and fire and connect things that happen to you during the day, right? And you have what's called pruning, where these glial cells actually go in there, and then it's like pruning things from a tree that are growing off, and you don't want them anymore, you don't need them anymore, or haven't used it in a long time. It prunes it. And that's what happens at night with these glial cells, because there's more than just astrocytes in there. You have what's called microglia, and microglia are like tiny little Pac-Man. They go tick, 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 during the night to eat up inflammation and stuff like that. Problem is, when you have so much activation in those, they can get turned on and they start to eat the good stuff too. And that's what happens when you have too much muck, where your system just goes, hey, man, let's just kill everything, right? And sleep is driven by respiration when you sleep at night, right? Because, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, if you stop breathing at night when you're sleeping, one, you can die. That's not a good thing. But a lot of people have that 1,000 times a night where they have sleep apnea,
Yeah.
obstruction. So that they wake up, but they're not sleeping through the night. So it's up, they don't even know they're waking up. They're getting out of this state because the brain power washing happens in the deep sleep of the brain. It doesn't happen all night. It happens in this magic window that few people reach, but you never get that clean. And then you're just exhausted because you have sleep apnea. And some people breathe with their mouth wide open at night. I was one of those people as well, like this. And you automatically shut down that system when you breathe through your mouth. Right? But I'm going to go back to it again. One of the reasons that people might struggle to breathe through the nose and have to have their mouth open and they have sleep apnea is because they have such congestion in the sinuses from congested lymphatics. They're so swollen in the deep lymph nodes of the neck that they choke off ever so slightly, flow to the brain and away from the brain. And then the body has to find a way to work around that. And sometimes it opens the mouth, which changes the way that the airway flows and the blood flows. A lot of people grind at night when they sleep, and grinding of the teeth can come from an underlying stress response. But they're also finding that grinding is a way to open up the airway to have you get air.
Huh.
So you're clenching like that way. And that really works the power muscles on the side of the head, called your masseter in the jaw, and then on your temple, called your temporalis. Those muscles, when you grind it like that, okay, you change the blood flow in the brain. So there's a lot of interconnecting puzzle pieces here. I know for me personally, I struggled to breathe through my nose during the day and while sleeping because I just couldn't breathe in there. It was so clogged. It had so much mucus. And think about that. What did I tell you already is the power of the nose. If you have a lot of sinuses and postnasal drip and mucus, you got glymph issues. Right? And they tell you with breathing, close your mouth and breathe through your nose. And you're like, I'd love to, man, but I can't. But then that's when I tell people, do the big six first. And then you'll likely notice that that was transformational for me. It was probably one of the most emotional times in my life, my friend, because for 10 years I just couldn't breathe through my nose, and I was always sniffing and clearing my throat, and it started to interfere with my personal life and my teaching and my social life, because I was doing it every 5 seconds, and plus my health was really, really suffering at the same time. But the first time that I could actually breathe in and out through my nose for an entire day, oh my goodness, it was something where my body was like, "Now you're talking, man." This is good. But it's a testament again to how all these different systems are interconnected. So sometimes I'll tell people, try to do the big six before you go to sleep and see if that makes a difference for you. And plus, when you can keep your mouth closed, you breathe better through your diaphragm, which increases the pressure in your body. So you actually create more of a suction of the brain fluid towards your collarbone. It's like a suction effect. I still have to tape my mouth shut at night for me. And I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of that is just because I'm 56 years old, and for 46 of them, my nervous system is adapted to breathing with my mouth open at night when you sleep. So it just kind of subconsciously goes there. So even taping your mouth shut at night can help your glymphatic system, the brain system.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I've always said, as someone, Perry, who's had, similar to you, chronic gut issues and sinus issues for most of my life, like, people don't appreciate how good it feels to have just a good poo or to breathe through the nose. Like, they are generally transformative when it comes to how people feel. And unless you've experienced what it's like to breathe through your mouth 24/7, it's horrible. So yeah.
Yeah, it's exhausting in so many different ways, because you're just extending so much energy to do that you shouldn't. And it really stresses the muscles in the neck, the shoulders, your traps and upper back, and then that feeds tension everywhere. Because what'll happen is that when you're a mouth breather, your head will automatically end up going further over your shoulders forward, and then your tongue, as opposed to resting at the roof of your mouth where it should be, the whole tongue, front, middle, and back, it lays in the bottom, the floor of the mouth. And then that changes your airway. And then when you go forward like this, guess what I did? I put kinks in my fluid pipes, my drain pipes, both ways. That's why if you can close your mouth, put your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and breathe through your nose, that tongue placement automatically changes your neck alignment, and it changes pressure in your neck and in your head. And then it's called intracranial pressure, inside the skull. You automatically get a better suction effect when you're doing that. Okay. So that's why one of the things I tell people is that close your mouth, put your tongue at the roof of your mouth, and do your big six. Then you're locking in those two. But if it's hard to do that, then, do your big six and then put the tongue up and go through your mouth. See if that opens up the airway. And same with pooping. When you can breathe through your nose as opposed to your mouth, you automatically engage what's called the thoracic diaphragm, which is a muscle that sits above your organs and at the bottom of your ribs, that when you inhale, it contracts like making a bicep, and it pushes the organs down. And when you exhale, the muscle relaxes. It's like relaxing the bicep, and then the organs come back up. And you do that over and over and over, like a couple thousand times a day. That moves the organs. And then when you move those organs, you help poop. You help bowel movements. go, right? So you not only help the brain and help the muck inside the head, but you help the poop. And that's going to help you because you can be really toxic when you can't poop. You don't want that stuff staying inside of you. So you have poop actually in your colon and you have poop in your brain. Both. So because the brain and the gut talk to each other, it's called the gut brain axis. So it goes both ways like that, right? So breathing and pooping, they're formed. I don't really like to use the term detoxification anymore because sometimes it's a trigger word. And believe it or not, some people in medicine don't even believe there is such a thing as a detoxification. And I'm like, did you read the same books I'm reading? But I come to terms that it's more so the word than anything else. I just call it waste management because that's what it is. So you poop all the stuff out. And remember, where's the majority of your lymph located? In your gut. And then you also breathe out a huge amount of toxins through your nose. Carbon dioxide being a big one, but also other stuff as well. That's why you can notice, man, your breath really stinks, but that means you're probably really toxic in your colon because you're not pooping, or you're toxic in your lymph, but it's got to go out freaking somewhere. Or you have a lot of bacteria that's overrunning your mouth and your gums and your gut, and then it's got to go out that way. So here's another cool bonus. When you start to work your lymph, you start to work your glymph, and you start to poop, maybe your breath smells a lot better too, right? So your social life automatically gets a little bit better.
Brilliant. I think
Yeah.
so many of our customers, as you know, struggle with chronic gut issues. You know, they have things like SIBO, intestinal permeability. We've discussed on the podcast before the kind of gut-liver axis and the sort of intimacy between the liver and those detoxification pathways in the gut. But also, you know, brain fog, poor sleep. These are becoming such common symptoms that people are struggling with. And I think what you share around sort of lymphatic support is not as available as some of the other considerations and interventions. So I'm really hoping that people take this on board and practice things like the Big Six to see how it improves things. I've said to you before, I had an old client of mine came onto the podcast and shared his journey through pesticide poisoning and mycotoxin illness. And he did your lymphatic mojo course, practiced the exercises, and had just the most profound experience by doing so. But he had to go through a lot. Like, he was having nightmares, he was sweating his sheets through and having to change his bed sheets. So, you know, be mindful, guys. This is powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because so many people have underlying gut issues. And today, I think everybody has a gut issue. They just don't know it yet. But now we discussed before, you know, the gut interacts with everything, of course. You have the gut liver axis, you have the gut lung axis. There's a big one. And the gut brain axis. But one of the things that I learned from studying neurology was that, you know, if you keep going after the gut and it just seems to still struggle, like I'm taking all these things and it's helping, but I'm hitting a wall. That's my cue to look higher north. So we go north to south, which is the brain, because the brain, you know, communicates with the gut through the vagus nerve. And you remember we did that podcast, and the vagus nerve is what gives the cues to blood flow that you're going to get down there to the gut. And if you don't have good blood flow to your gut, well, your gut's not getting better. I don't care how many supplements you put in there. And then I'm going to ask you, how in the world do the supplements get there anyway? Right? Through the blood. And so what you'll notice is that if you can clean the brain, and then the brain functions better. All these nerves that control, you call your central nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, that control out here, that maybe you just have a breaker switch that's been blown, that you need to clean out your toilet then all of a sudden that pathway can begin to work a little bit better because it has the potential to do so. That's why it's there, right? But maybe it's just not in an environment where it can do so. And the brain has only got so many resources available to it based on your oxygen and your energy, and it's got to decide what it's going to devote its time to. Like, hey, I only have 40% of my 100% energy. Where can I send it? I'm going to choose where to send it. Well, what it's going to do is going to send it to the things that will keep you from dying right there on the spot. Right? It's got to keep your heart going, stuff like that, lung beating, all that kind of stuff. It could care less if you're thinking straight. It could care less if you're happy or depressed. Those are really low on the totem pole because it's hard to be those things if you're dead. So one of the things that happens is when you clean the brain out, the lymph out, then you get optimized energy. And then now you can devote that towards other things. The detoxification / waste management that your body has to do is probably the most energetically demanding thing that has to happen all the time, all day long. So you don't die, but then so you can thrive. And just think about this logically. All these organs that we've been talking about, their primary job is to break stuff down and get stuff out. That's why you got them. Right?
Yeah.
And here's the next point. It's like my fish tank analogy. What controls the fluid environment that all those organs were going after lives in? Well, it starts with L and it ends with lymph. And then now I just want you to pay attention to the one in the brain. When you get both of those guys, watch out. I mean, it's like crazy kind of changes that you get.
Excellent. And I guess
it certainly is.
the question that comes up, Dr. Perry, is obviously you've emphasized the importance of sleep for the glymphatic system. Are there any sort of out the box things that clinically you have found to be helpful? I'm just thinking if someone's struggling with sleep, you know, they can start with the big six, for example. They can think about how they're breathing and potentially take them out. Let's assume they know about sort of the basic sleep hygiene that sometimes is just pretty irrelevant for people with sleep issues anyway. But what else would you start thinking about as a way to support sleep quality?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, those are probably the top because basics and fundamentals are called that for a reason. And you would be surprised how many people don't do the basics and the fundamentals, right? But I read this quote once, and I can't remember who said it, and I don't know if I'm going to get it exactly right, but it's this: how you sleep depends on how you wake up. So what does that mean? Your sleep quality depends about what you do throughout the entire day before you go to sleep. Most people just focus on what to do when they're sleeping because they're getting ready to sleep. Then I'm going to go into your lifestyle and ask about, okay, what do you do or not do during the day? And I can tell you this much: if you're coming in to see me and you've been everywhere else, I already know one answer. You're not doing lymph and you're not doing glymph. So I would do that first. And I would make sure that I'm well hydrated. And then I do a breathing screen to see where you're breathing from, your nose or your mouth. Are you going from your shoulders? Or are you going from your abdomen? And how long you can hold your breath before you got to breathe. That's called a body oxygen level test, a BOLT test. Because if you can't hold your breath for a long period of time, I know you can't optimize oxygen in your body. It can't get to the tissues, and we need to work on that, right? The lower that score is, the sicker you are, the more information that you have. And you would probably not be surprised, because you're in this world, of how many people are really awful at that.
Yeah.
All right. And so optimizing that breathing, optimizing the lymphatics that you're doing. But then I'm going to look at the rest of your life as well. Maybe, just maybe, you're living in a toxic emotional environment, in a relationship, in a work environment. Maybe you have a toxic relationship with yourself because you hate your body and you hate yourself because it's not getting better, and you all this negative talk. Or you hate the way you look, and maybe you've always hated the way you look because of societal norms and what people expect you to do. Those are always going to increase the nervous system's sympathetic response and neuroinflammation. And then you're going to feel that at night when you're trying to sleep. So I would tell people to take an inventory of who you spend the most time with, and take a break from some blue screen time that's inside of any type of device. And if you choose to go on any device, watch your time on social media, because that will pull you into the sinkhole of hell and pain and inflammation, because it's toxic. There's very few places on the internet that are supportive. Just go spend a little time on Twitter, point proven, right? Go outside in this thing they call nature, where you have trees and you have dirt, and you don't bring anything with you but yourself, and spend some time there. Hug a tree, grab a tree, put your body around it, and let that connection, there's an energetic connection between that. And one of my favorite books that I read was The Secret Life of Trees, I think. Yes. Is the name of it. You read that book, that'll change your life. Like, you would never do anything to a tree ever again when you realize how much those things interconnect with each other, because you're also breathing in the bacteria and the fungi out there that are going to heal your microbiome as well. And then take your shoes off and put your feet on the earth. And that's called grounding. But it's also just a connection that's innate. And another one that I started doing, I'll be honest with you, I know we might be running long on time, is that I started to look at, okay, what are the things that we did thousands of years ago when we didn't have all this technology? And you just had to, spend time with other human beings, have quality conversations. But everybody would gather around this thing called a fire, because you didn't have light. And you're gathering in a circle. And that circle has healing to it as well. But then you light the fire and something happens. It's in your DNA from your ancestors. It hasn't gone anywhere, where you're looking at the light and the flames and the changing flames. You automatically feel yourself relax. But then people had their own entertainment, and it's called stories. They would tell you stories. That's why we learn through stories. We don't learn through information and data. You like to think you do, but you don't. And then watch what happens to human beings, how they change, and they begin to, it's a little darker too. So you feel you can come out of your shell. You open up a little bit. You share things, but you can do that just with yourself. So I'll tell people, try if you can to stare inside some type of flame before you go to sleep, and turn off that crap to look at anything at least an hour, some say 2 hours before you go to bed. I have a really novel idea. How about you start a fire? You sit down there, you do your big 6, you breathe in and out through your nose, right? Write in your affirmation journal a little bit about something that you're grateful for that day, and something that may have crushed you, but I want you to find a positive spin on it, because there is one, whether you know it's there or not. And then I want you to let me know if your sleep changes. And I know the answer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for that. I think that's a refreshing answer to a question. I think it's so easy these days to go to just think about blue lights and, the kind of the typical response, but you've given
melatonin, right?
Yeah. You've given so many different strategies. And as you say, it starts with how you wake. So getting outside in nature and thinking about the first hour of your day as much as the last hour of your day is just so important.
Yeah, you always have to remember, man, there's a human being that is attached to the tissues that you're working on, the diagnosis that they've been given, and the label that they've been given and that they assumed.
Mm.
Never forget that, and always go back to the statement that I mentioned in the beginning about everything working together. Right?
Yeah.
We're so detached in healthcare today, where we want to blame something, we want to attack something, we want to destroy something or kill something. I mean, that happens all the time in the vernacular of, cancer and COVID and all that sort of stuff. But no, I'm resonate more along the lines of the Eastern medicine philosophy of interactions, yin and yang, relationships, quote unquote, you're right or wrong. But I drop those words now and just use the word different. And that in and of itself can make a huge shift in your body. And watching the language that you use, the words that you use, and how you talk to yourself, not just out loud, but in here. Yeah, because it's usually not so supportive. I put a post up on Instagram this week that I was just I was sitting in my light bed doing my meditation, and I put it up, and it seemed to resonate with people. It said, be kinder to yourself and you feel better. Be meaner to yourself and you don't. You choose. And the operative word is there, you. You choose. Oh, it's not easy, but nobody said it was going to be easy. But it gets easy the more you do it, and it can be transformational, because people are so mean to themselves. It's astounding.
The word that really resonates there is relationship that you said. I think something I was reflecting on yesterday is the relationship we have with our diagnosis, the relationship we have with our food, the relationship we have, as you say, with ourselves. Like, we're in a relationship with everything. But we don't, most of us as practitioners, including myself, really, we don't ask questions around the relationship our client has with their condition. There's an area of medicine called narrative medicine, and the whole premise is, we need to understand the story of the client, including that relationship they have with the diagnosis, and that just completely and utterly transforms how we approach things ultimately. So that kind of really resonated with what you shared there.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to cycle it back to, what's another word for narrative?
Story.
Story. Exactly. It's the story you tell yourself, or what's usually the driver that you don't even realize it. It's the story somebody else told you.
Yeah.
That you're grabbing onto, of your diagnosis, your label, your self-identity of who you're supposed to be, if you will. So you can choose to tell yourself a better story, because you can choose to tell yourself a worse one as well. Okay. And your pathways are going to be completely different based on that switch that you have there. Now, I'm not saying that if you tell yourself a better story that everything's going to be unicorns and rainbows and you're going to heal yourself and everything is great. Yeah. Sometimes, there's suffering, there's chaos, there's pain, but that's where change comes from. That's where lessons come from, because you're not going to change when you're comfortable, because why would you? You're comfortable. So it's only when people hit the abyss of rock bottom that it usually kicks them to do something. But I will tell you this, if you tell yourself the opposite side story, the negative story, you don't stand a chance. So I'm going to take my 2% on the positive to your 0 chance over here. Because if by some means you get to where you want to get to on the negative one, you ain't going to last there long, because there's going to be another sinkhole as soon as you move your foot off that one. I just know it. That's the way energy works. That's the way the vibration works and energy works. That's why you need to choose who you spend your time with, choose who you learn with, but also explore outside so you see different approaches, different points of view, which is increasingly more difficult for people to do today because it makes them feel uncomfortable. I read a quote once from Jim Rohn, who was kind of like the bedrock of the self-improvement movement years ago. One of my favorites, it's ROHN, Jim Rohn. And he said, you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And then I changed it up a little bit. And I said, it's the 6 people you spend the most time with, because you're the first one. Yeah. Like, you're the one that you spend the most time with. So look in your life for the toxic people in your life, but first start in the mirror, because maybe it's you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's so many different paths we could go down there, Dr. Perry, but that's going to might have to be Glymphatics round 2.
You mean 200, right? Because dude, I mean,
yeah, but
I can keep going. I love this stuff. I mean, I hope that it just gives people a new context, a new story of, you know, looking at their body and looking at how the systems interact, but how it's always trying to do the best it can with what it's got in the moment it's in to heal and protect you, because it is.
Yeah. And the way you share it, Dr. Perry, I think it clearly really resonates with people. If you go and look at our vagus nerve episode on YouTube, you know, there are 3,500 comments, and people are either getting great experience and benefits from the exercises you shared, or they're just really resonating with how you articulate this stuff. So thank you very much for doing what you do, and in particular, I think the way you do it.
You're welcome very much. I can't believe the time's over already.
I know. But yeah, that's been brilliant. I think a lot of our customers are going to find this super helpful, Dr. Perry. So as I say, thank you very much for sparing the time for, I think, episode 4 now on the podcast.
Thank you very much, my friend. And also to everyone listening, truly grateful.